Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
We've got a couple great stories to talk through today. Stick around because the last one is a doozy. So we're going to start with an article that was actually in our backlog. This happened back in June, but it came up to the surface because of some things that happened this week. So I'll get into it here. WhatsApp was banned on Capitol Hill. And this gets into is WhatsApp safe? Because if it was banned on Capitol Hill, you kind of have to wonder, well, why was it banned versus other chat apps? And so the story is why this really came to head. And as I saw this, I was like, oh, I should talk about this week. A couple of my old team at Microsoft, which we were all in charge of the DoD accounts. So we had all the military departments as well as the three-letter agencies for Intel and the Joint Commands and the DIB, actually. And so, some of them have left, some of them are transferring to new teams. So there was a message thread that was spun up, and we were all in the security business. And it was interesting because this message group thread was spun up just on messages. And so some of us had, iPhones, and some of us have Android, and immediately you start seeing the blue and green bubbles and everything. And I kind of cracked a little joke right away as soon as I was added. I said, this isn't on Signal, so there's no texting of classified information, too soon. And then someone complained about the blue and green bubbles. And when you react using RCS, which we talked about RCS being available now on iPhone a couple of weeks ago, and that's that new protocol where you can react to messages, you can reply to messages without
receipts.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep,
and so
receipts,
you don't have to worry about it.
Notifications.
The old way, right? Where you would, when you reacted to something and it would literally send an SMS text.
Andy gave a thumbs up to this message.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was happening only to actually, so what's funny is this was an interesting thread to kind of experience in real life, because the people who were on RCS were able to do all the things that modern protocols can do. But then there was one person that was not on, or one or two people that were not on RCS, that you could see when they did that, they would send a text to the whole chain that was happening. Give thumbs up, someone reacted, whatever.
Yeah, if you're in a group message on an iPhone and one person does not have RCS capabilities, the whole group chat then falls back to, and it says it's SMS. If you want to be super technical, it's actually MMS is what's being used for group messaging. Technically speaking, SMS does not support one-to-many messages. So
correct. Yeah. So MMS.
Yeah, it falls back the moment one person doesn't have RCS.
Yeah. So then they were like, oh, we should move this to Signal or Telegram was the two things that they suggested. And then they specifically said, let's not move to WhatsApp because, and I quote, because it's spyware. And so that's why this article kind of triggered a thing that I was like, oh, we should talk about this. So let's talk about, we've done shows on this before, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but WhatsApp is pretty safe, right? It's end-to-end encrypted Signal protocol, which is the same protocol that they use for the Signal app. And end-to-end encrypted means that Meta, who is the parent company of WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, they cannot read the messages or the content of those messages flat out. It's by default end-to-end encrypted. But they do collect metadata, which is not to be confused with the company Meta, which again owns WhatsApp. And the metadata, they don't publicly say what they collect. And so we assume that they're going to collect the identities of the chat people, IP addresses, your phone numbers, which are synced with your profile, timestamps of the chats, basically anything that's available to them outside of the contents of the chat itself, they can collect and use for whatever purpose that they want to. If they want to know where and when you're using their applications, who you're messaging, kind of connect the dots right there, right? And part of the issue is that they're not really transparent with what they collect and how they use it, which is par for the course for Meta.
I mean, that's their secret sauce, so I get it.
Yeah. And so that's part of the issue why, like, okay, it's not as good, right? Signal is much more transparent with what they collect. It is part of some of the issue with Signal over the years was that you had to have a phone number. It was associated with, a name and all that. And it wasn't completely transparent or like secret. So you could figure out who you were talking to. They are making changes to that. Interesting enough, Signal is going to allow a username, just a username. You can go and reserve your username now if you want to. I don't know when it's going to go live, but they've announced that feature. So you don't have to have a phone number associated with a Signal account pretty soon, if not already. So that's good. And another issue with WhatsApp is that it's always asking you to back up your chats. And if you back up your chats on Android, it's going to go to Google Drive. If you back up your chats on iPhone, it goes to iCloud. And those aren't encrypted by default. We've done shows on iCloud backups and all this other stuff. They're not encrypted by default. There's a lot of risk to the consumer if you do encrypt those backups, mainly because if you lose your password, you lose your phone, you won't be able to recover the content. So there is some risk because that's what encryption does. It's if it's end-to-end encrypted, that means the company that is hosting the data doesn't have the keys to decrypt it or unlock it. And so you just have this encryption blob that would be impossible to brute force using today's technology. So that's why most companies don't encrypt backups by default. But you can turn it on, and you can turn on FA by default or it's not turned on by default, but you can turn it on if you want. You can also require biometrics or a PIN. So these are all things that aren't enabled by default, which Signal doesn't require a PIN either by default. So those are some, I guess, knocks against it. But the biggest thing is that there's metadata that's collected. As far as like alternatives, which was suggested in this chat, a Telegram was suggested, and that's one that I would not go to. There's the encryption protocol is proprietary. I don't know if it's been vetted or not, but the main thing is that the chats themselves are not encrypted end to end by default. So they use something called secret chats, which if you use Facebook messages, it's kind of the same concept. You can turn on end-to-end encryption for like Facebook messages. Same thing with Telegram. You have to turn it on for the specific chat. So if I'm messaging Adam, I'd have to turn it on to turn that specific chat to end-to-end encrypted. Otherwise, they're not. So they're just open. Signal is probably by far the best and most vetted encrypted chat app out there. It's one that I use all the time. It's great. There is another one called Threema. It didn't really gain traction, mainly because one, it's a paid app, but not expensive. It's like $4 or something like that. But it doesn't require phone numbers. So most people who use Threema are probably people who are in really high risk, like journalists who are reporting on governments and whatnot. And so Threema is out there. It's good. It's the same end-to-end encrypted protocol, but it doesn't require a phone number. Never picked up traction, mainly because it's harder to use and costs money. And with the Signal coming out with the usernames, it's probably going to be a little bit easier for those folks to use it. So anyways, I thought it was interesting. It's the same reasons why WhatsApp is banned is basically they don't trust Meta, right? Like to collect the data and is not being transparent. And it's kind of the same thing. But WhatsApp is probably by far the most used like end-to-end encrypted app worldwide. So if you look at like other countries, they're always using WhatsApp. So it's and that's part of the whole thing is like if no one's using your app, like it doesn't matter how secure it is, right? Like it has to be easy to use for the normal consumer.
One thing occurred to me while you were talking through all this, that WhatsApp has always been end-to-end encrypted, and the content of the messages has really never been in doubt that is secure. There are ways to make it less secure, as you mentioned, with the backups and everything, but it occurred to me that at the scale WhatsApp operates, because to your point, Andy, it is used in every corner of the world. When you step outside the United States, it is typically the default messaging platform. It is what's used any other country of the world. SMS is really not used anywhere else either. They all use WhatsApp. And it's to the point where Meta would not want to have visibility into the content of those messages because the administrative overhead to deal with legal challenges from every corner of the world and different countries and banana republics and dictatorships and everything else would be completely unmanageable. The only way to manage that service at the scale it operates at would be to not have line of sight, to not have visibility on the messages.
Yeah.
It's not a benevolence thing. I think it's actually a business cost reduction strategy, that it would cost more money for them to see them at this point, more than they could ever monetize it with ads anyway. They're starting to run ads in WhatsApp, the application anyway, based on metadata and your usage profile and everything else, but not on the content of your messages. I honestly don't see that's changing for that reason. The other thing you mentioned, and I just want to clarify this, it's not that like iCloud backups aren't encrypted.
Mm-hmm.
It's that Apple holds the keys.
You're right.
And that is for ease of use. As we've talked about when we've gone through this, same thing with iMessage. iMessage is very strongly encrypted end to end. Apple cannot read your messages unless, of course, you turn on iMessages in the cloud or store device backups in iCloud and you don't have advanced data protection turned on. Advanced data protection is where you manage the keys. If that's not on, Apple manages the keys on your behalf. And that allows you, in case you get in a scenario where you get locked out through various means, that Apple can help you recover it. And for most normals, that's probably the right approach. But if you are a tinfoil hat aficionado, I'm kidding, if you just care more about your security, then you can turn on advanced data protection and you can manage your own keys. And then, like you said, Andy, it's on you. If you get in an unrecoverable state, that's too bad. We feel really bad for you, but you got to move on. So, by the way, total random side note, when I used to work for Apple, they taught a phrase to use when a customer had suffered some sort of catastrophic data loss or device loss or whatever. You would say, as it turns out, the hard drive in this MacBook has failed. And this was back when we were using hard drives, so that was a relevant statement.
Mm-hmm.
But as opposed to saying your hard drive failed, which kind of puts like responsibility on you as the person of like, you did something wrong, your hard drive failed, which is not true, by the way. Hard drives were, as we all know, consumable goods. They fail on an infinite timescale 100% of the time. So when you say, as it turns out, it makes it more of like, it's the way of the universe. This thing just happened to happen upon your MacBook, and it's such a shame, but here's what we can do about it. So it was always interesting. Apple retail in its earlier iterations, today, obviously, it manages such scale and has to move so many people through the doors. But when it first opened, and for its first 10 years of operation, I'd say, before the iPhone became this massive success, all of the customer service model was based entirely on the Ritz-Carlton's principles of service, almost ripped off completely. I randomly stumbled upon the Ritz-Carlton's like principles of service, and being a former Apple retail employee, it was stunning how many of them were one and the same, from how Ritz-Carlton treats its guests to how Apple did. So anyhow, total side note. But yeah, I mean, the great conversation here. Ultimately, I don't really have heartburn with using WhatsApp if you want to use it. I understand the scrutiny of Meta. I heard a great phrase on Windows Weekly this week where Richard Campbell described Meta and Google as surveillance capitalism. And I was like, that is a fantastic term for their business model. That's basically it. And so, yeah, it is healthy to have skepticism of everything Meta and Google do because of how they make money. But in this case, if you're primarily concerned with the content of the message, WhatsApp is fine. But at the end of the day, if you're really concerned, to your point, Andy, just go use Signal.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're all in the Apple ecosystem and you're all in the walled garden, iMessage is a fine choice too, because it is very strongly secured. I think they've actually already moved to quantum resistant protocols within iMessage as well. They're way out in front of it. We did a show on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, Apple has done a really great job there. There are some caveats to know, especially if you can't validate how the other users are, say, storing their backups. The content of your messages could ultimately still be retrieved in certain circumstances. So that's worth being aware. End-to-end encryption ultimately really only helps you during transmission, not for data at rest. But all our listeners and viewers know that. So
plus, Signal's good enough for classified war plans, right? So
absolutely, yeah, as proven,
good enough for your information.
Yep, isn't that right, Pete?
All right. So our next story. This is really interesting because it kind of gets into some privacy and fears around some of these laws that are being made today. So Discord was recently hacked and breached, and the attackers stole about 70,000 government IDs. So they weren't Discord themselves weren't necessarily breached because they actually use a third party service that Discord entrusts with managing this data, and that third party was breached. And so Discord requires certain users to provide a photo or a scan of their government ID to show that they meet the minimum age in their country. And these requirements are imposed on users usually reported by other users to be under the minimum age. In the US, it's 13 years old. If you're not aware of that, it's 13 years old to get an email address. It's 13 years old to do any digital services at all.
And that law goes back to either Bush or Obama administration. It's been around for a long time.
It's been a while. And it's interesting because like as soon as my kid turned 13, like a lot of parental stuff was unlocked for him on his account. It was like all of a sudden he's like grown up or something like that. But I accidentally, so here's an interesting story. I did give, my younger one a Discord account. We had to essentially lie about his age in order to create the account. But I had forgotten that. And so when we were like, we had to like renew or do something, there was something that we had to do. And I put in the birth date as the real birth date. And it was immediate that the account, they literally said, this account does not meet the age standards. And they just deleted it. Like instant. It was gone. All the messages, everything, it was just gone. And so it's 13 in the US. So anyways, getting back to this, like there are other services like Roadblocks, Steam, Twitch that also have this, require some of their users to submit IDs. And there's a lot of fear with submitting your government ID over the internet to, a service that, who knows how good that they're managing that data. And in this case, Discord uses a third party to do it. And they obviously didn't do a good job of managing the data. And this comes at the heels of 19 of the United states that are requiring age verification to access pornography. France and UK have also passed laws. And of course, there's a lot of apprehension at that for sure, mainly because not only do you worry about your ID getting stolen, but also just the fact that if it is and it's associated with something like that, a lot of people don't want their real ID associated with their, probably their porn browsing habits and whatnot. Pornhub, which is arguably the largest site out there, said that they're blocking access in those regions that have passed laws rather than complying with it because they don't want to normalize sending personal information over the internet and also the increase to identity theft. And honestly, like for regular users, there's not a whole lot of recourse to, like, if all of a sudden a site requires you to upload a government ID. I think that there's just, other than just not using the site, right? Like you could use VPN in today's age, right? Like to geolocate yourself somewhere else. But there's a high likelihood that, as people start to do that, that these sites will just start to block the egress IPs for VPN providers. If they know of a popular VPN provider, they'll just start blocking those IPs so that you have to do it. Interesting enough, something that just occurred to me that could potentially solve this is using something like verified ID. If there was something that can be verified and then you're issuing a digital credential that can then be used across, that might be a better way to solve this, age verification type, without having to upload the government ID. Like for example, and if you're not familiar with what verified ID is, it's just a way for someone who's already verified who you are, and then they issue credentials for you. One way that people have done it would be like the ID.me, where like if I'm trying to get military discounts, I can, ID.me had me upload documentation to them, including sensitive documents, but they're a service that, that's all they do is they verify. That literally is their business model, is that they're verifying identification. And then you can use that login with an API to other sites to get like a military discount. Another example is Clear. clear in the airports. They use facial scans and everything, and you have to upload all sorts of documentation to them to make sure they're who you are so you can get through airport security. They actually use Microsoft Entra's verified ID on the back end to do that verification. There's a digital credential that's issued and then verified and given out to do the authentication. So I think that's a better way than like just randomly uploading your ID to like Discord or Roblox or, God forbid, some porn site that you have to do verification on. I think if these sites can try and get a digital ID using like verified ID, which is backed by blockchain, it's an open protocol, that would probably be a better way of accomplishing this.
This goes back to a story that repeats itself over time. It's this whole concept of we want to carve out exceptions, but only for the good guys kind of thing. We want you to upload your identification, but we only want the good people to view it so they can validate your identity. And then, of course, they're not going to do anything else with it, right? They're going to securely delete it right away. Wrong. They're going to hold on to it. Because why? Why are they holding on to this identification?
That's a good question.
Now, I wonder if these laws are requiring it, because again, you can remember how many times have we been through this where there's been potential laws. The United Kingdom has tried for years to pass surveillance laws that require backdoors and encryption. It goes back to the whole nerd harder concept. If you could just nerd harder, you could figure out a way to do this. And it's when you're transmitting personally identifiable information and someone is storing it, then you are at more risk than if you had just not done that. And by the way, to anyone who is, a business person out there, and they're debating saying, well, if we contract this out to a third party, then if something goes wrong, our name won't get dragged through the mud. Wrong. Because look at this headline is Discord says hackers stole government IDs of 70,000 users on Ars Technica. Ars Technica is not a clickbait site. Ars Technica is a proven, time-tested, time-honored, very high journalistic standard site. They are not writing clickbait headlines. Technically, no, it wasn't Discord. Discord may have said it, I suppose. But it was a third-party vendor whose name is getting trashed in every article. It's Discord's. So trying to hand this off to someone else is not a bulletproof strategy to keep your name out of the media or out of negative reputation or negative consequences. It's still your name at the end of the day. So keep in mind, whoever you choose to partner with, your name is still on it. Your reputation is still staked on it. So you need to know they're buttoned up and they know what they're doing. To your point, Andy, that ID.me site, I've had to use it as well. I forget what for, but
taxes probably.
Yeah, that might have been it. It does a nice job. And it is very much that centralized concept of here's one organization who's going to do this, and then everyone else can draft off of it. They can just validate, hey, is this person this age? Where do they live? Whatever. It is interesting. You did call them out by name, but Pornhub has always been like very much a leader in terms of adopting strong positions on some of these changes over time. And it's not just about maximizing their revenue streams. They often will they could make more money if they would, partner with some identity management service and take more customers. They're literally saying, we don't even want these customers anymore because we think it's wrong to normalize sending PII over the internet, which they're right about. And to your point, Andy, maybe there is a way to nerd harder and solve this one. Actually, maybe there is a way to figure out some decentralized identity where you don't need my identity as long as someone else says, I am this age or I am this or that. And if we can get to that model, that would be very positive. My state, Iowa, does support digital ID in Apple Wallet. I have my ID in my Apple Wallet. I've never used it for anything. Theoretically, I believe TSA can use it at the airport here in Des Moines and other airports that are enrolled in it. But I think I tried to do it one day and they're like, oh, it's not working today. And so then I hand them my global entry card, which they always grumble about, which I find hilarious because it's like, this was issued by the Department of Homeland Security, which is your parent organization. How is this harder for you to read than a driver's license issued by the Iowa Department of Transportation? Make it make sense. Like, this is from your same org. Why they grumble every time I hand them my global entry card for ID at the airport. And the reason I do it, by the way, is because then there's less chance of losing my driver's license. I would rather lose my global entry card because it doesn't really mean anything. You don't even need it to use global entry at an airport. The card is like for land borders. If you're going to drive in from Mexico, then you can show your global entry card. But I just like, well, what would I'm most comfortable with losing at the airport? It's that card. So I always use it. Anyhow, total tangent. This is going to be a developing story. And I agree with you. I would like to see some more of that verified identity kind of concept come to light. Continue to be very uncomfortable with the idea of, just take some scans of your passport and your driver's license and send them to us. Not a great idea. And ultimately it will come back on you.
Especially like in this day and age with like AI, like you could easily like get a scan and forge it and do whatever you want for identity theft.
But why are you even retaining it? I mean, unless again, maybe these laws, some of these laws are like, the Commonwealth of Kentucky require, and I don't even know if Kentucky is, sorry for, catching you with a stray there, Kentucky, if you're not, but the Commonwealth of Kentucky requires you to be, 19 years old to access adult content on the internet, and all providers are required to retain proof of that identity for 180 days or something incredibly stupid. Like, it should just be, you're required to verify it and you have no expectation of retention. In fact, the law recommends you do not retain it. Like, that's how it should be written.
Yep.
It make sense. Like, why is this Discord vendor keeping them? I don't know. In general, get rid of your data. Like, listeners, like we always talk about, give actionable insights on this show. Get rid of as much data as you can. Retain as little of it as is required to run your business and be in compliance with the law. Past that, don't retain anything. Like, just get a hardcore data lifecycle management strategy in place, because it will come back to bite you in the wrong way. I promise you.
Good call out there. All right, this next one, Adam, in the pre-show you mentioned you didn't even hear about it, but it's pretty off the press, but like it happened a while ago. Well, TransUnion, which is one of the 3 credit bureaus in the U.S., recently experienced a significant data breach of 4.4 million customers. There was an unauthorized access to personal information that was stored in a third-party application, Salesforce. The attack was attributed to
third-party application again.
Yep. It was
Wasn't
attributed
even
to
TransUnion system. But
shiny hunters, which might sound familiar because we on this show talked about them a couple weeks ago in the quote unquote Google breach, which wasn't a Google breach. It was just, the CRM system was breached, and then they used that Salesforce data to then use social engineering attacks and, email address, phone numbers, and call them and continue the attack from there. But a filing with Maine's Attorney General's office revealed that the type of information that was breached included names, date of birth, and social security numbers. However, TransUnion stated that no credit information was accessed during this incident. Well, thank goodness no credit information was accessed, only the social security numbers. So the date of the incident was actually way back in July 28th, and then it was discovered 2 days later. TransUnion confirmed the incident on August 28th of this year. They started notifying affected individuals, and that's how it probably hit the media, because this wasn't actually reported until just recently. So they started notifying individuals, providing details of the breach, and they're offering 2 years of free credit monitoring to those who are affected. I think credit monitoring is, this is pretty standard, right? Like any someone gets breached and then they're like, I'll give you a couple years of free credit monitoring, right? I do think credit monitoring is something that everyone should have in this day and age, because this stuff kind of happens all the time. There are services that you can pay for, like LifeLock is probably one that you've heard of, and there's plenty out there that can hook in and monitor your credit and other things. I've had one that has been provided for me because I was part of that OPM breach way back in 2015. And I will tell you, it is, I guess it's a nice security blanket, because whenever I do something that affects my credit, I will get a notification that says, whatever, you applied for a car loan, or you applied for a credit card or something like that. Was this you? Yeah, exactly. I also get other things like child predators that are in my neighborhood and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting. But if you don't want to do that, you can always just call the 3 credit bureaus like Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, and just have them freeze your credit. It's kind of a painful process, but how often do you actually need your credit, right? Like if you're doing a mortgage, right? Like how often do you buy a house? How often do you buy a car? Maybe once every 2 to 3 years. Um, how often do you apply for credit cards? Probably not that often. So it's like you don't really hit your credit that often. And so one effective strategy would be that you could just call all three, freeze your credit, and then when you need to, you would just go and unfreeze it. And that would be free because you can, I'm fairly certain it's free to do that. Maybe they do charge a small fee.
No, it is free.
Okay.
They will try to upsell you, of course. You can also
Okay.
do it online if for those of you cringing about having to talk on the phone. It is difficult. They do not make it easy. This was required by law. Something passed sometime during the Obama administration. They are required by law to offer it for free, but they don't have to make it easy. A lot of them include that. So they will. It is like full of dark patterns and it's a pain in the tush. But if you are persistent, you can do it.
Yeah. Okay. So not too much to belabor that one.
Yeah, I was surprised by this, but I see now that it wasn't theoretically credit information, although I'm sure there's enough in that database to, like you said, go request credit on your behalf. So it's still just as bad. And it's just crazy to me that after the Experian breach, so many years ago now, it's amazing like any of these could ever possibly be caught in the news again. By the way, I kind of talked over you, Andy, but it wasn't really TransUnion system, it was Salesforce. And yet TransUnion is who's listed in the headline. Again, just outsourcing stuff does not take your responsibility away. I just want to really point that out. Otherwise, you hit everything. Go freeze your credit. It is free. It's a pain, but it's possible. Unfreeze it when you need it. When you're requesting, like you said, a mortgage or taking out a new credit card or buying a car. I will say, for the most part, I used to pay for a credit monitoring service, and I started getting it offered through different credit cards, through my bank, to the point where if I do anything with my credit today, I get about 5 emails from 5 different systems all telling me. So I don't need it anymore. It's basically an included feature of everything. Citibank, American Express, my credit union offers it. Discover cards offer it. A lot of them do. You know, some of them have limitations. They may not be as full featured as a paid service. But if you want to get alerts of like, hey, there was a new inquiry, a new account was opened, I'm getting that included today with existing relationships. So
good point.
You can also look into that and consider that, because I just get blown up anymore if I touch anything, which is great. Like you said, it is very comforting. So yeah.
I mean, at this point, I would assume that every single American has their social security number in some database in the Chinese government. You know, like that's just par for the course.
Has happened, yes.
So yeah, if you don't think that your social security has not been breached, it has. That's what I would just assume, that someone has it somewhere. So just go ahead and monitor. All right, this final story, and this is a doozy. So in late August of 2025, Jaguar-Land Rover, or JLR, is a UK-based luxury car manufacturer. They suffered a cybersecurity attack, and it was attributed to the hacker collective known as Scattered Lapsus Hunter.
Andy, do you know who owns Jaguar-Land Rover?
Is it a Chinese company?
It is an Indian company.
Indian company. I don't know.
Tata Motors.
Oh, that's right.
Which is part of the Tata conglomerate. You may have Tata Consultant Services, TCS, in your organizations. If TCS is running your security, make sure it's not the same team that was running cybersecurity at JLR, huh? I mean,
yeah.
That, again, downsides of being a massive conglomerate is your name is on it. So yeah, Tata Motors is the parent company of JLR.
And Scattered Lapsus Hunter is something that might trigger a memory as well. They were in the news, years ago, but I think actually around the pandemic timeframe, 2020, 2021. They were doing a lot of social engineering attacks, and that's what they're known for, is social engineering attack. They would do voice phishing, MFA bombing. That was like one of their novel techniques back in the day, which is essentially where you have breach credentials and you just continue to send that MFA prompt, and eventually that person just hits yes. And that was like the impetus of like Microsoft moving from just the yes no to number matching, and number matching not only like in the 3 numbers but actually putting in a number for it. And
not just pick one of the 3, but what are the 2 numbers you see on your screen? You must type them both. Yes.
Yeah.
Lapsus inspired. Also, Lapsus was regular on Telegram, recruiting insiders and offering to pay them
Yes.
to help leak credentials and stuff. So they were very novel through their social engineering means more than technical means.
And that's how Jaguar-Land Rover was breached. We'll get into that in a little bit, but this attack basically forced JLR to shut down their entire global IT network starting in September 1st and halt all vehicle productions at all of its plants worldwide, including UK, Brazil, India, and globally. So
Slovakia.
they produce about 1,000 vehicles daily. So shutting this down was significant to their bottom line, right? And it was several weeks that everything was shut down. They just started back up their production, and the disruption not only impacted JLR, but it also impacted its supply chain, which included about 120,000 workers across 700 different suppliers, which many of them are small to medium business enterprises. And so because of this, that led to layoffs and financial instability for those suppliers. Which, like, it's interesting because I have a good friend, and I was just telling you, Adam, I have a good friend who works for a small company. It's just like maybe 50 to 100 people, and they make little widgets for Ford and GM and other, manufacturers. And if like those companies couldn't make cars, then they wouldn't be able to make the widgets, and they would essentially go out of business. So this caused the UK government to intervene with an unprecedented 1.5 billion pound loan guaranteed. That's a lot. 1.5 billion pounds to support JLR and to safeguard the supply chain. And so here, the vector of attack, and this is what I was alluding to, the breach was actually exploited using social engineering tactics, which again, Scattered Lapsus Hunter is very known for. So it was phishing over the phone, and they stole employee credentials, and then they allowed attackers to infiltrate IT systems without needing any sophisticated exploits. This was attributed to poor credential management, lack of consistent multi-factor authentication, and weak network segmentation contributed to the scale of the attack. The attackers were able to manage sensitive internal data, including source code and employee information. They deployed malware that disrupted IT operations. Interesting enough, I was listening to Security Now, which I haven't listened to in a while, but I was just kind of spinning back up, just randomly listening to episodes. And Steve Gibson, who's one of the hosts there, he's been on the show for a long time. He made a comment a few weeks ago, and it was, in this day and age, you have to prepare for this type of attack. You just cannot be sitting back. And one of the things he said is the segmentation of networks. You have to do that and not have a flat network. I know a lot of companies have flat networks, even large corporations, like global corporations have flat networks, but you must have, network segmentation to make it as painful as possible and limit the blast radius of a malware or ransomware attack.
Assume breach. I mean, it's basically in 2 words what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and what's funny is that, as I was researching this, I did not realize that JLR was breached just in March. So they had 2 major breaches this year. In March, they were breached by a criminal group named Hellcat, where it was just data exfiltration. They stole a bunch of sensitive data, but including vehicle source code and employee data and development logs. We're always worried about these smart cars and smart features within cars, because the bus is unencrypted and what runs everything. And, you see all these movies where the attackers are stopping the cars or taking remote control of them. I mean, that's not, I don't think that's out of the
They all have
sci-fi.
telematics today, man. They all have cellular connections, persistent cellular connections that are phoning home and sending data. And then General Motors is selling it to the insurance companies, and then they're raising that happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if we talk about it on this show, but that 100% happened, that GM was selling usage data, and then somebody got an insurance company renewal for their policy that it had gone up because they'd been recklessly driving.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not a sci-fi story today that hackers can do this. And so that was just happened in March, and that apparently spurred a whole reform to their security. They rolled out MFA requirements and password updates is what I saw, as well as vendor access reforms. So that attack was, the vector was a dormant Jira credential from a vendor employee like in 2021. So, life cycle management of vendors and their credentials is obviously something that is usually under the radar for most companies. You just provide like a vendor credential to someone, and then that person may leave, and maybe they hand those credentials off to the next person. They're like, oh, you're Joe now here at JLR, right? Like that happens all the time. So anyways, that I'm like just at a loss here at a global corporation like that, still not requiring MFA for every single employee.
Well, you said so they had a March cyber attack, and looking at the show notes here, you said MFA requirements and password updates were implemented, but then this attack that happened in August, poor credential management, lack of consistent multi-factor authentication. So this goes back to when you are handed the right to implement change at a fast scale, then move fast. Then go fast.
Yep.
I know all our listeners and viewers would love to do more than they're allowed to do. I get that. I worked in enterprise IT. I still work with people in enterprise IT, and I understand the rate of change is slower than we'd all like. But when you're given that opportunity through the air cover of, say, a cyber incident, then get your wish list implemented. Like, so the fact that this happened in March, and I don't know all the details, right? But 5 months later, to have someone get in because MFA still wasn't consistently enforced kind of stinks. I mean, and again, global company, I get it. It's complicated. There could have been something you didn't have visibility or know about, but, and believe me, we have not gotten it all right at Microsoft. By the way, Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales, but we did use the air cover of our Secure Future initiative, which was based on some cyber incidents, to do things like roll out phish-resistant MFA to all users in 30 days. Microsoft has 228,000 vendors and employees worldwide, and they rolled out phish-resistant MFA to everyone, and not everyone is technical, and it got done. And so, again, I don't know the details here, but that stands out to me that they said at the end of March, oh, we put out MFA for everyone. We have new MFA requirements. And then they got hit again because there were still gaps in MFA enforcement. That's tough. That's hard to read. Yeah. And especially in 2025.
I was really encouraged when I was at the last conference that I was at, and I was speaking because it was an identity focused conference. And when I was talking to everybody, my talk track was on token protection. And so it was like implementing risk-based conditional access, talking about the requiring token protection, managing different sessions, the authentication context, like step up, MFA, step up, phish resistant stuff within Entra. And as I was talking about all this, like I was getting nods, and people came up to me, they're like, yeah, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And it's like, they're not just doing MFA, they're like going beyond. And so like, I know there are companies out there who are like, getting better, but this kind of unfortunately brings me back to like, okay, well, there still are companies that still are apparently back in the 90s where they're not requiring MFA. Right. And so, this was not cheap. This breach, and so like this is the reason why I wanted to talk about it, because like we always talk about the cost of a cybersecurity incident. The estimated hit to JLR's revenue is going to be more than 3.5 billion pounds, and that's also about 250 million pounds in profit. So while they were shut down, it was 5 million pounds in profit daily and 72 million pounds in revenue daily that they were losing when their stuff was shut down. So, they're probably going to be okay. They had about a 29 billion of revenue in 2024. So they'll be able to probably absorb the financial costs. But, the smaller companies and their supply chains, it's going to be tough, right? They did get this loan to help out. But there might be some of them that will go out of business, jobs will be affected. So it's a cascading effect. So this was not cheap. This can happen still. And so it's like, I get that budgets are tight, you're trying to cut everywhere, but security, I think has to be a conversation as part of the business process, because if you're not prepared to absorb costs like this or hit the revenue, then this is going to be a problem.
I had been working on a thesis on this show, and dedicated listeners and viewers will recognize this, where I'd started to say, I'm worried that these incidents aren't impactful enough to encourage companies to invest in cybersecurity. I was worried the opposite was happening, where people were getting a little too comfortable with it. We'll have our lawyers draft up an email. We'll send a message out saying your cybersecurity is important to us. We take it really seriously. We brought in, an expert third party to do a full review, and it's never going to happen again. Here's 12 months of credit monitoring, right? Like, it was rinse and repeat. Everyone knew the playbook. We've gotten those letters in the mail. And I mean, you could paint by numbers on them. You could do Mad Libs on them because they're the same gosh darn letter every time. And not that I want to see bad cyber incidents happen. Quite the opposite. I would love a world in which we never have to talk about this again. On some level, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully, it's not that I am glad this is still happening, but I think this is a powerful reminder as our leaders set their budgets for the year and choose where to place their investments. Investing in cybersecurity still matters, and it still has a return on investment, because dodging the risk of this, a 3.5 billion pound impact, which is about $4.67 million for those of you who would prefer the US dollars version, is
billion, right?
Billion. Sorry.
Yeah.
I said million. Yeah. Billion with a B, is a significant impact to any organization. And Andy, you touched on JLR may be able to absorb this, but what about their downstream or upstream vendors that are part of their ecosystem, especially in automotive manufacturing? If you're not familiar with this, generally you have tons of upstream vendors who make the different widgets and components and pieces that got assembled into the final vehicle that aren't made by that company. Actually, today, my day job at Microsoft now, that's who I support. I support the mobility industry, which is not only automotive manufacturing, but automotive supply chain. And there's all these companies you don't know about that are really, really important, and they cannot as easily absorb these kind of financial impacts. If JLR isn't building new Jaguars and new Land Rovers, then they're not ordering parts from those upstream vendors, and that could put them out of business. And so this stuff just really, really matters, and it's still important to invest here. I know sometimes it feels like you can just kick out the Mad Libs letter from legal and go buy everyone a year of credit monitoring, and your cyber insurance pays for it, and now you got to implement a whole bunch of cybersecurity settings you've been wanting to do all along, and life is good again. Maybe your CISO doesn't even get scapegoated anymore because we're so used to it. But it still matters, and there's still the possibility for incredible disruptions, and not just financial loss. There's plenty of industries where there could be loss of life. There could be major negative human impact. You think of critical infrastructure all over the place. You think of healthcare and life sciences all over the place. And Andy, I know your spouse works in healthcare and has had impacts from time to time when she hasn't been able to use electronic medical records, and that could cause negative impacts on the ability to keep accurate records, to treat patients with the best possible care. It goes on and on. You go all the way back to the national health system in the United Kingdom once had a cyber incident, and Microsoft agreed to patch Windows XP because they were still running it, even though XP was well past end of life. And it was basically the head of Windows at the time, Terry Myerson, kind of said, like, what else was I supposed to do? People were going to die if we didn't do that. And so Microsoft did step up and wrote a patch for Windows XP, and it had been literally end of life for a very long time. This stuff still matters. We need to invest. We need to protect all of our enterprises, no matter what business you're in. And this is why. And we've had examples recently, very visceral ones. We've had MGM Resorts is still the gift that keeps on giving, because people saw that impact of slot machines shut down, empty casinos, long lines of people trying to check in or check out from their hotel rooms. Like, it still matters. It can still affect your business. So this is very obviously, I'm glad the UK government stepped in. It sounds like all the upstream suppliers are going to make it. We know Jaguar-Land Rover will make it, and Tata Motors and the Tata conglomerate in India will be fine. Gosh, when you get handed that gift of that opportunity to move faster, please take it. Yeah. If nothing else, that's my one takeaway from this. If you've had a cyber incident and now you've got senior leadership team's attention, you've got the board's attention, go ask for the moon. Be like, hey, we're doing fish resistant MFA for anyone right now. I need you to approve this purchase order for 1,000 YubiKeys for people who won't put it on their phone, but we're doing this now. go shoot for the moon, go ask for big. And start with identity, because identity is still the control plane and humans are still the weakest link. And ultimately, you can train the heck out of humans, but they will make mistakes. So make sure you have technology in place to mitigate human mistakes, whether they're malicious or accidental.
Nice summary and call outs there. All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for sticking around and listening to us. Thanks for watching every week and listening to our ramblings on security. Hopefully you learned something and you're taking away something for your organization. The links to the topics that we talked about will be in the show notes, as well as our contact information. If you have any questions or topics that you want us to talk about in the future, please email us. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.